Before we go into the Padlet, I would like y'all to take a moment to go into your notebook. I didn't put anything new because you have already what we'll need for today. So please open up your interactive notebook. You should have saved a copy. I did encourage y'all to take those slides, and they're in the Google Classroom, so you should have access to them. In our Google Classroom, let me come to the right classroom. Right, here's second period, so Friday. Here's I think that was the video that I posted, but here's the slides that we needed. So the goal of Friday, right? We started with the Venn diagram, anatomy, physiology. You had these three slides. And then what I did is I copied pasted those. So I took them, file, copy, or you could cut or whatever you want to do. And then I went ahead and pasted them. Where is it? I have so many things open. I pasted them to what I already had, right? Because we were working on math, a little bit of, and I'll go over that assignment with y'all in a moment. And then safety. So I just pasted them. So I have them there. Okay. So today we're going to be starting with this one. You're going to see some blanks there because we're going to be typing into there necessary life functions for humans, and then we'll be using our table. Okay, so that's what we'll be using today. So take a moment if you haven't to open that up. So the Padlet for today dealt with telling the difference or identifying when we're talking about anatomy and when we're talking about physiology. So what I would encourage y'all to do, because this is part of the test and part of the quiz, is telling the difference between anatomy and physiology. What I would encourage y'all to do is as we go through the Padlet today, if these are blank, if there's nothing in those Venn diagrams, as we go through the Padlet and I go over the answers with you all, that you start writing those down. So organ size. Organ size, we'll go over the answer here in just a sec. In your notebook, organ size, you're either going to type in anatomy or physiology. So take those words or take those statements from today's Padlet and put them in a circle as we go through them. Students did share with me that they couldn't type on them. I attempted to do a text box and I guess it didn't work the way that I thought. It's one of those technological issues. So if you cannot type in it, you can insert a text box. And when you do that, it should let you type on it now.
Yes, we can't see your screen.
Oh, darn. I've been talking to myself. Well, I mean, talking to you, but you couldn't see anything. Thanks. Thank you. So I'm here as in the notebook. Not that one. This one. And I was just telling y'all guys, you can just go to insert text box. This is where we left off on Friday. And insert whatever you need to. I would definitely insert those from the Padlet today as we go through them. Because when we take our quiz and our test, you are going to have multiple choice questions, much like the Padlet where you have to identify if it's anatomy or physiology. Okay, so you can do that. And so again, all I did is went to insert text box, and then I did that. Some of you are keeping this on a separate sheet of paper. That's fine too. So this is what we did on Friday. Friday, I did record the video, and then I was working on grades, and then I uploaded the videos, but it's on private. So right now, while you guys were having breakfast, I was trying to change the details of the video so that you could see it. So I'll work on that right now during my lunch period. So they're uploaded to your Google Classroom, but you are not able to view them. So as soon as I change the setting, you should be able to see the lesson. And so one of your classmates brought that up to me. Thank you. And so that'll be there if you missed it or you want to go back. I want to talk about grades. So everybody got the 100 for the Instagram profile, so that was awesome. Where there was a lot of struggle was in this assignment, the measurements in medicine. And basically, if you're curious why you got the grade that you did, and you want to go over yours specifically tomorrow, you can pop in during our asynchronous period. You don't have to meet with me, right? Because you'll have an assignment on Google Classroom. But if you want to know, Miss, why did I miss that? Or like, what did I miss? We can go over yours specifically because it's on a spreadsheet. But I will let you know that the reason that most students lost points is one, they didn't show their work. So here in the instructions, and it's very important that you get into the habit of reading out the instructions. Please show your work by typing out how you solve the problem. So basically, and I'm going to make a video of this and solve every single one through the video. So if you got it wrong, you can have that as a tutorial, but you should have shown your work. So that was -5. If you didn't add the units, if you just put 210, right? But you didn't put milliliters or milligrams, you lost 5 points. And then if the answer was wrong, since there were six of them, each of them was worth 16.9 points or 16.6. I only took off 16 points. And so the numbers were odd. It was like 89 or 69 or like they ended in odd numbers because of the way that it was set up. So if you did struggle with that, I am going to go through every single one of these problems and I'm going to solve them. But please just be very careful when you get a Google form, especially with units. You may not experience this in the others because this is the only really solving measurements in medicine. You'll see it again on your quiz. But don't forget units and don't forget to show your work. Okay, so that was that assignment. Now, in terms of dropping grades, because I know students, you're concerned about your average, and so students were asking, well, how can I bring my grade up? And so right now, those grades will stay as is, but I will give an opportunity to every single one of you to drop your lowest grade. So if that was your lowest grade, and of course we're excluding tests. Tests you have to retest, but for like that assignment, if you're having a bad day or you didn't, you have to attempt it first. So for students that didn't do it and have a 0, this is not going to apply. This only applies for students that attempt the work. What's going to count as your dropping of your lowest grade is to keep up with the notes. So for this 6 weeks, since it's a 5 week, 6 weeks, I'm not going to take the notebook as a test grade, but what I will do is I will ask you to submit it the last week of the 6 weeks to just submit your slides. If everything is kept up and you have all of your notes, I will drop your lowest grade. And so if right now it's like a 50 some, and that is your lowest grade, since it's 40% of your grade, it is kind of causing a little bit of a dent there, but it was pretty low. It'll get dropped, and that'll be your opportunity. That can also count for quizzes. So if you're good right now, you got 100 and you're not concerned about it, but you get a low quiz grade later on, um, this will also apply to that. So any low grade that's not a test grade will get dropped as long as you attempt it. For students that didn't try it and they have a 0, that will not apply. Okay. So tomorrow for your asynchronous, I'll put the tutorial of how to do it, and I'll be here if you have very specifics, like you want to see your work, because I have to pull up the Excel sheet. So let's go ahead and go to the Padlet. So you should be here. And as we're going through it, I highly encourage y'all to be filling in the Venn diagram with these because you're going to see these on a quiz/test. Okay. So identify the following as anatomy or physiology. 1, organ size. Organ size is anatomy. So very good. I see most of you put that. Number 2, dynamic, constantly changing. That is physiology. Very good. So in here, I would go and put that dynamic. So dynamic means your heart rate's going to change throughout the day. The amount of acid that your stomach produces is going to change throughout the day, depending on whether it's empty or there's a meal in there. Your nerve impulses are going to change throughout the day, right? That's physiology. Very good. Stable. That is anatomy. So once you reach a certain age, your organs are developed and they're mature size, they're not going to change much from now until you're 60 some. They may have disease later on, or they may get damaged because of foods or substances that you put into your body, but for the most part, they will stay stable. We expect to see the size of the brain consistent from person to person, excluding disease, right? So anatomy. So I would put that in my Venn diagram, stable. And if you don't know what stable means, you want to add that, not much change. Number 4, chemical in nature. That is physiology. So very good. I see a lot of you put that. So digestion, enzymes, all of that requires chemicals. Number 5, best studied on live subjects. It's physiology. We want to see how those organs work. We do that best if the person is alive so that we can see how the organs are working. I would put that in my Venn diagram. Number 6, best studied in deceased patients, a dead patient, anatomy, because we can take the organs out. We can weigh the organs. We can see the internal organs, as most of our organs, like our lungs, our stomach, our intestines, uterus, all of that stuff is in the inside. Okay. All right. So make sure y'all put your name on there. If you missed any, it's practice, so you can definitely make those corrections when we take the quiz or test. Right now, if it didn't match the answer that I shared with you, it's not going to count against you. You were participating. Okay. So again, I'm recording this, so as I move on, right, if you want to go and pause it and add these to your Venn diagram, or you're having a hard time right now with the text box, they'll be here for you. Right? Okay, guys. So we're going to continue now, and we're going to look at what is it that a human being needs to maintain life. In order to stay alive, what are the necessary life functions for a human being? So we're going to go, and I'm going to move this slide here just so that it's in order. So we were here. We're going to come over here, this one. Necessary life functions. So I'm going to show my PowerPoint. So I'm not going to be following along with you, like typing in the words, but as we go through them, you'll type them in. So just to give you an example, and then I'll come into the presentation. Right? Necessary life functions, movement, right? And so as we're going through these and I'm elaborating and we're explaining what that means, you're going to go ahead and here into your notes, you're going to type movement. You have the freedom to change the font, to change the size, to change the color, whatever you want to do. These are your notes. You are responsible for keeping them. So if you want to highlight, you can. If you don't want to highlight, you don't have to. Keep in mind that if you do want to drop a low grade this 6 weeks, excluding the test or not the test, but anything else, you do need to keep up with this. Okay. So you should have saved your own copy. You should have that. And I'm going to undo this because otherwise it's going to affect the template. All right. So we're going to get into next is the necessary life functions for humans. Just to kind of also let you know, if you want more or additional information or you want to read up more on that in your Google Classroom, you have the book in the Bitmoji. So if you click the skeleton, right now I'm following the sequence of the book. So you go to view online. The life functions are going to vary a little bit. So you have your PowerPoint, but you also have elaboration here, right? Like movement. So you also have that you can definitely go into for more in depth, or if you want to read up on it as well. Just kind of be very thorough. But you have that there that's in your book. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So necessary life functions, movement, and you're typing these into your notebook as we're going through it. All right, so as a human being, you want to be able to move, not just physically, like your body from point A to point B, but you want to be able to move things throughout your body. You want to be able to move blood so that it can carry oxygen to every single cell. You want to be able to move food from your mouth all the way through your stomach, intestines, and out as waste. So you want to be able to move internally and externally. If there's a predator, if there's a threat, you want to be able to move. There's something that's very relevant to anatomy. It's called if you don't use it, you lose it. This could go with information. If you learn a language and you don't practice it, you're going to forget it. But if you don't use for example, your muscles will start to atrophy. So you may have people that right now maybe aren't very physically active because they're kind of at home and maybe they were very fit back in March. And so they've lost that muscle mass unless they keep up with it. So movement's important also to keep up that tissue and maintain it. But movement, like you want to be able to move so you can escape a threat or to move things throughout your body. I want to show you something that's pretty relevant in nursing. You may have heard of bed sores. So I'm going to show you this. I'm going to get out of the presentation. I'm going to come back in. I don't have the picture in here. Okay, so in nursing, sometimes you have patients, I'm going to close this, that are bedridden for a while because they were in a coma or they're very ill. Like right now, people that are on ventilators because of COVID, they're in one position for a large period of the day, right? They should be on their bellies, and sometimes they'll get moved to their side. But if you are not moving, right, sometimes you'll see this with, I know like I watched this show called My 600-Pound Life, and the patient sometimes can't move because they're so large, they'll start to get bed sores. And so what happens is when you put pressure on that part of the body and there's no movement, because of injury or coma, that part of the tissue starts to die with time because you're putting so much pressure, right? The bones pressing up on that, the skin, the muscle, and the blood can't get there, so that part of the tissue dies. And so you end up with something called the bed sore. So as a nurse, you need to be constantly moving your patient from one side to another, from their stomach to their abdomen, lifting the leg, releasing that pressure, because then if not, you'll develop a bed sore. And then I'm not going to show you pictures because they're pretty graphic. If you want to Google them, you can. They're kind of a little bit gruesome, but then they'll get infected, right? Because it's dead now, and so bacteria can get in there. So here are some common areas for bed sores, like the lower back, the feet, right? The parts that are pressing up against the bed. So you want to move your patient, and movement's very important. It's essential to a healthy life, but also to a functioning human being. Once we pass away, there's no more movement. Next, response. You want to be able to respond to your environment. This is where the brain kicks in. So for movement, we use our muscles, we use our bones, right? We're moving, our muscles move our bone. If we're moving food, the digestive system is responsible for that. But responsiveness is mostly our brain. We want to be able to respond to sound. We want to be able to respond to sight, right? Something we see in the corner of our eye. And so this is mostly our brain. And so we're able to sense changes and react to them. So think of the five senses, like your sense of touch, things that you touch, right? Everything that you sense in your environment is going to get directed through your brain. So if right now you are full because you just had breakfast, your stomach is sending a signal to your brain, right, that it's full. How you act accordingly, right? That'll be sometimes something that will be conscious, right? Some of these responses are unconscious, like your heart rate speeding up in response to needing more oxygen or adrenaline. Growth. We do have to increase in growth in tissue, bone, muscle. So if you happen to get a cut or you go through surgery, you need to increase, right? You need to replace that muscle, you need to replace that skin. Um, you all are still growing. So at this age, you're growing, especially for females, it has slowed down quite a bit. So more than likely, if you are 16, 17, 18 and you're a girl, you've reached your adult height. Gentlemen, you'll continue to add bone and muscle until about the age of 21. However, up until about the age of 25, your brain is still growing and you're adding finishing touches to your adult body size. After the age of 25, you really don't see any more new growth in terms of new bone. You can definitely add more muscle, right? If you use it, then you'll add more. But in terms of like bone size, you're not really going to grow. Your brain is its adult size. Your organs are their adult size, and you pretty much maintain until you start to kind of get in your 50s and 60s. At that age, you start to lose. And so we start to see bone loss, that's osteoporosis. You may even see that people appear like they're shrinking or they're getting shorter, and that's just because you're losing bone. So you're growing, growing, growing. 25, you kind of plateau. You stay pretty consistent into your adult years, and then you start to kind of see a descent. Okay, reproduction. Now we're looking at necessary life functions. Do you have to reproduce to be like as a necessary life function? No. But this is more specifically the necessary part comes from your cells. Your cells do have to make more cells because our cells do die and you have to replace them. So if you need to make more skin cells, you're gonna need to, or you lose skin cells due to like you scrape your knee, you need to make more. Um, Now, there are some cells in our body that don't really reproduce, and those would be like your brain cells, for example. So if you lose a lot of brain cells, let's say through a traumatic injury, you're in a car accident and you come flying out the window because you're not wearing your seatbelt and you damage your brain doesn't do a very good job at replacing those. Some research is showing that we can, but the ability is limited. So there are some people that will go into a coma because they were drowning and they didn't have oxygen for more than 5 minutes, or um, they were in a car accident and they had like a traumatic brain injury. And so after that point, oftentimes they may never come out of that coma and that brain damage is permanent. But when it comes to the cellular level, your cells do need to replace each other. And then if we talk about sexual reproduction, you are going to pass on your DNA to your offspring. But in and of itself, sexual reproduction is not a necessary life function. You can have be a perfectly healthy human being without reproducing, but we're looking more here in terms of cells. Respiration. All right, super important to get in oxygen. We're going to see the threshold for how long you can survive without it. But the reason that oxygen is important is so that you can make energy. So if you're not breathing, your cells are going to start to die once you run out of whatever oxygen is in the body. And so we'll talk about CPR here in a sec. And what the purpose of that is but respiration, being able to breathe, is necessary. You stop breathing, that is going to be probably one of the first signs of death, unless you can reverse that. Next, digestion. So you want to be able to take, if you all just had breakfast just now, the food that came in is going to look drastically different when it comes out because you're chemically breaking that food down. So that's physiology. You're mixing it with acids, you're mixing it with enzymes, you're mixing it with bile to basically break up the fats. That's what gives feces its brown color. So all of that changing of the nutrients that you take in the food that goes in is digestion, and you need to be able to do that to be able to extract the carbohydrates, the proteins that you're going to need um, to survive. And then you need to be able to absorb it. So if you, for example, digest it, you just had, let's say, some cereal and you throw up, then you're not absorbing those nutrients. And so absorption is also very important. Not only do you want to break it down, but you want to absorb what's in those nutrients through your intestines. So digestion and absorption, those are the digestive system. So there's an eating disorder known as bulimia. And with bulimia, there's a pattern of binging and purging. So with bulimia, the person eats and eats and eats and eats large amounts of food in short periods of time. And then after they eat it, shortly after, they'll go ahead and throw it up. And that's the purging. So they're not absorbing their nutrients. So even though you may see them eat a large meal, if they're not letting that food pass through the intestines, and they're not absorbing the nutrients. So digestion and absorption are important together. There was a case of this little girl. I do want to share it with you more in more detail when we get to the digestive system, but her intestines were sucked out of her body through the suction part of a swimming pool. And so when they got her out of the pool, she was, I believe, 5 when it happened. They couldn't save her intestines. Like they just could not. And your intestines are for absorption, right? You're absorbing water and you're absorbing the nutrients. So what ended up happening is she got an infection after, I guess, the surgery to try to repair the damage. And so she has no intestines at all. She doesn't have a stomach. She doesn't have a liver. Like all of her abdominal organs are gone. How in the world is she alive? So basically, this young lady is fed through, I think she's fed through her veins, like a very special combination of nutrients. So she's getting it directly into her bloodstream instead of having to go through the digestive system, but she cannot eat. So I believe she doesn't have a stomach either. And I'll share the specific case with you when we get into the digestive system. So if she swallows her food has nowhere to go. So she misses the taste of food, right? Because she basically gets fed through her veins. And so once in a while, she'll like put some food in her mouth and chew it, and then she'll have to spit it out because those organs aren't there anymore. So the digestive system's the very crucial for 6 and 7 to digest and absorb. Circulation, you want to be able to move substances throughout your body, oxygen, nutrients, hormones, all of that. And that's where the cardiovascular system comes into play. It's like the highway that reaches every single part of your body. And then assimilation, turning the things that you take in and then making them your own. So if you had fajitas last night, you need to break those down, absorb the proteins, and then turn them into what you're going to need them for. So if you're your own muscles, for example. People that are bodybuilders, they take in a whole bunch of protein, a lot of lean protein like fish and tuna and chicken, and then they break it down and they use it to make their muscles. And then excretion, you want to get rid of those wastes. Urine, feces, all of those are waste. Carbon dioxide, those are waste. You don't want to leave them in the body. You want to be able to get rid of them. And so your kidneys will filter out the waste in your blood, and that's what the urine is. The darker your urine is, the more waste concentration there is. So the less water you have, the lighter your urine is, the more water there is, and the less waste is concentrated. Okay. Okay. So you should have had an opportunity to get that slide. So here's where we're going to go next. You're still in your interactive notebook, right? So we are here now. All right. You see a table. You see survival need. What is the purpose of that need? And then the threshold. Threshold is going to refer to how long you can survive without it. Okay, so basically we're going to see like without oxygen, what's the threshold? No more than what? Or like what are we trying to like how long can you survive without that need essentially? The purpose of that need, like what do we need oxygen for? And then the name of the survival need. Okay. It's important for y'all to recognize a threshold because on your test, You will be given examples, different real life scenarios of people in different circumstances, and you're going to have to decide which survival need is being compromised. So if you're in the desert, for example, for 3 days, which survival need is most at risk? Probably not oxygen, right? Because you can still breathe, but you'd have to consider what is going to be in danger. What am I going to be at risk for not having enough of? Okay, so you guys will be following in the table. The PowerPoint doesn't have the thresholds. I'll be asking y'all to help me, and then I'll be talking about the purpose, and you'll just be putting those in there. Keep in mind that keeping up with your notebook is one of the ways that you can drop your lowest quiz or daily grade. So let me come back over here. Before I continue, I'm going to hit just a break. You guys, can you see now? You can see, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any questions
Yes.
before we continue? I'll put the Padlet one more time in case you'll need it if you came in a little later. We're good? Okay. So let me come up here. Just to kind of let y'all know, I'm not trying to give y'all ideas, but I'm thinking about like obviously all of this is new technology. The Google Meets does give me the time, or it does tell me when students logged in. So just make sure that y'all are logging in also. You're doing both the Padlet, but also staying with us, okay? So this also gives me a record. So what I don't want to happen is for a student to just do a Padlet and then head on out. So make sure you stick with us because I can also answer questions for you live. Okay, so we're over here. You're in your table. Okay, so these are the following, and you can already put them on the left. You can type them in there. These are the following essential survival needs that we need to stay alive. So if we can't get a hold of these, and sometimes we have more of a window to be without them, but if we can't get them into our body somehow, then we die because the organs that need them the most will pass, or the cells that need them will pass. And so because of the hierarchy, right? If cells die, tissues die, like brain tissue. If brain tissue dies, then the brain dies. And if the brain dies, then we can't function because the brain is responsible for all of the life processes and regulating and receiving signals. So the first one we're going to look at are nutrients. So nutrients we get through our food. If you are in a coma, you get your nutrients through an IV, you get it through your vein, you get a very special combination of fluids. But you need access to nutrients because that is what your cells need to stay alive. And so, does anybody have an idea of how long we can survive without nutrients? Food, essentially, nutrients referring to food. So there's just something called the rule of threes. For nutrients, we can live about 3 weeks without eating. It's a pretty large window of time. So the reason that we can survive about 21 days or 3 weeks without nutrients is that our body does a very good job at storing nutrients. Particularly, we store energy, right, which comes from our food, like carbohydrates and things like that. We store it as fat. So if we were to have, let's say, because we're in quarantine right now, we're kind of at home and we can't really go out, and we've been eating and eating and eating all these weeks, we're gonna, since we're not using that energy like we normally would, let's say that you guys would be doing football right now or band camp or volleyball, and you're not able to participate like you did in the past, then you're not using that energy, so your body will store it. Because traditionally, like in early humans, right, they were nomadic and they were periods of times where they didn't eat, so their bodies did an excellent job at storing whatever nutrients they came across. And so we store those nutrients or that energy as fat. And so basically, your body will catabolize itself. It'll feed on its own fat. And so if you don't have access to food for about 2 to 3 weeks, you'll get very thin, right? You'll get really, really skinny because your body has fed up or fed on all of that stored fat. So you have about 3 weeks. If you can't get nutrients or you're not able to keep getting enough nutrients after that window, then that's when death results because you're not able to feed the body. And so I did reference bulimia as a binging and purging. Anorexia is another eating disorder where a person purposely deprives themselves of the nutrients that they need, and it's very dangerous because their cells are not getting the nutrients that they need on a regular basis. So sometimes, oftentimes, people with anorexia, they purposely are starving themselves. They get heart attacks or electrical imbalances, and so it's very dangerous. Okay, number two. So for the cerebrally nutrients, why do we need it? To keep our cells alive, to keep our organs alive. You can put that there, and functioning and healthy. And then the threshold, 3 weeks. Okay, oxygen, incredibly vital. We know that if we cannot breathe, if we're drowning, if we're suffocating, if we're not able to take in oxygen, we can only live for about 5 minutes. So threshold is 5 minutes. What's going to happen is, though, you will probably become unconscious sooner than 5 minutes. So if you are drowning, or if somebody, let's say, for example, is restricting your ability to breathe, after about a certain amount of time, you will lose consciousness. Your heart, if it's still pumping, will continue to pump whatever oxygen's left over from your lungs. But after 5 minutes, when there's no more oxygen left because all of your cells used it up, then that's when death results. And so there are people that can train their bodies to hold more oxygen. So definitely we can adapt and we can condition our bodies. So there are some reported cases of people that can hold their breath for 11 minutes. They've trained to basically allow their lungs to take in huge amounts of oxygen, but also for the red blood cells to hold more oxygen. If you're not specially trained, you've got 3 to 5 minutes. We're going to go with 5 minutes. And so what happens is after that 5 minutes threshold, our cells start to die because we need oxygen to make something called ATP. And if so, you remember that from biology, oxygen is vital to make energy for our cells. So after that, when the cells start to die, particularly the cells of your brain, if the paramedics get to you and they start performing CPR, right? And let's say your heart has stopped pumping because of the lack of oxygen, and they pump it for you through CPR, right? They're pumping through bone, and they're pushing on all that cartilage, and then they're trying to, they have a little bag to try to like inflate your lungs with. Even if they get your heart back up and running, if you've been deprived of oxygen for about longer than 5 minutes, then oftentimes there will be brain damage. And so after that point, you may be revived, but you may be in a coma or suffer permanent brain damage. So oxygen is super vital, that we don't go more than 5 minutes without it. So definitely those paramedics getting in there before that would be vital. I will tell you that there have been some cases where people that suffer heart attacks, let's say that they have a heart attack, so their heart is not pumping the oxygen anymore and the person's not breathing. People that suffer heart attacks in cold environments, let's say that they're out in Alaska, right? And maybe in the city, cold temperature slows down the death of your cells. So you even think of like organ transplants. If people donate an organ, right, they carry it in like a cold container. So the cold actually stops some of those cells from dying. It kind of slows down that decomposition process. So they may be able to live a little longer. Or people that maybe like are in an avalanche accident, but for the most part, 5 minutes is the threshold. Why do we need oxygen? To make energy. So significance, oxygen is necessary to make energy. Number three, okay, water. Water is very vital because the majority of our body is made up of water. We need it to help make up blood. We need it to remove waste. You'll find it in your urine. You need it to help you digest your food. So water is super important. It also helps to regulate our body temperature. So we sweat. We are able to cushion organs with water and resist temperature changes because so much of our body is made up of water. So it's very essential to maintain homeostasis. So you can put all those under significance, right? So water removes wastes, resists temperature changes, cools us off, helps to make up blood, okay? All of those. If you are pregnant, right, that's going to make up the amniotic fluid for the baby, right? It's going to be present there, the list of fluid the baby's floating around in, right? It's not water, but there's water in it. You can survive without water for about 3 days. Reason being that we live less time without water is because we can't store it. So our cells are not adapted to store it. We constantly have to be taking into our body. Now you may be wondering, well, I don't really like water. I don't drink water. I drink juice. I drink iced coffee. I drink Gatorade. All that has water, so your body will extract the water from it. There are some people that feel that you have to drink 8 cups of water a day, and that was a very popular recommendation for a long period of time. But really, you need to drink to thirst. You want to drink when you're thirsty. Um, the more water you have, obviously that's going to help you to remove waste, but everybody's body is going to need different amounts of water. If you are an athlete, you're going to need more than somebody that doesn't do much throughout the day in terms of physical exercise. And there was even And see, the thing with the survival needs is you can get too much of any of these. You can get too many nutrients. You can actually get too much oxygen. Let's say that they're giving you oxygen at the hospital and it's not the right amount. Or if you're like a premature baby and they're giving you too much, right? That could be dangerous. So you need to make sure that you get the right quantity. Too little is dangerous, but too much is dangerous. And actually taking in too much water, which is not going to happen for the majority of us, right? Because we'll get full, we'll go pee, right? There's urination. But there was a situation while back with the Nintendo Wii came out where they were having a radio competition. It was called Hold Your Wii for a Wii. And you guys can Google it if you want. But in the Hold Your Wii for a Wii, the people that wanted the Nintendo Wii, and it was around Christmas time, so a lot of people, there's one particular person that died. She had three little kids, I think, and she wanted it for her children. They had to drink, they had to basically chug and chug and chug water. And so as much as they could. So whoever stopped drinking water would lose. And so it came down to this lady and this guy, and eventually the lady started to feel real full. They couldn't throw it up. They couldn't go to the bathroom. I think she stopped or she won. Like if you go and you look it up, I think she won. She's like holding up the tickets in her last picture. And so what happens is when we push our body to the limits that way, the water is basically going to rush into our cells and cause them to burst because we're not regulating it anymore. And so within hours, she died. Her brain swelled from all of the excess water, and there's no room for your brain to swell because of your skull. And so she died. So we definitely want to listen to that need, right, to drink water, but we don't want to push it. So 3 days is about how long we can live without it. Normal body temp, 98.6. And this is an average. So if you were to take your temperature right now and you were at like 98.2 or like 97.9 or even 99.1, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Your average could just be different. But if we happen to venture out for too long, like drastic changes, like let's say we're at 101 because we're out running in the sun or we have a fever, it's important to come back to this home base or this average or close to it so that our organs can work the best. If we don't, and here it is 37 degrees Fahrenheit, so that was in the measurement questions, and some of you got that incorrect, but that's the equivalent of 98.6. If we can't come back to normal, then we can die. And so I wanted to just share two examples with you. The significance or the threshold, it depends. It depends how high it is. If your temperature is like at 107, you want to bring that down. So it could be minutes to, I would say, maybe even an hour. So I want to share some specific examples with you. And I'm going to start with frostbite. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, so just letting you know. All right. So frostbite happens when our bodies are pushed out of that 98.7 degrees in the direction of going below it. So let's say that you guys are hiking up the Himalayan mountains and it's too cold and your body is trying to maintain homeostasis, trying to get your temperature back to 98.6 and you're shivering and you just can't. Well, what's going to happen is your body's going to focus on keeping your heart and your lungs alive. And so the way that it's going to do that, if you think about your hands, right, and your feet and your nose, your extremities, those aren't important for survival. I mean, you need them obviously, but if you get your hand amputated, you're going to still live. But if your heart or your lungs stop working, you can't. So what your body does is it starts to shut down the little capillaries and blood vessels in the hand. And the reason it does that is to redirect all that blood to your core. So now your fingertips, your toes, your nose, anything that's kind of projecting out is no longer getting that warm, nutritious blood because all of that blood is being taken to your core to kind of keep your heart and lungs alive. So what happens is the longer you stay out there, the longer you stay out of that, if you're not able to bring your body back to 98.6 or within normal, you're going to stay in the situation for longer. What's going to happen is your extremities will start to die because they're not getting that oxygen anymore. They're not getting those nutrients. And so eventually, the longer you're there, eventually all of that tissue dies and you end up with a very severe case of frostbite. And so in these situations, if it's this severe, bacteria are now going to say, oh, look, we just got a new meal, right? Because they're going to feed off on all that dead tissue and you'll have to get that amputated. So it just depends, right? You can maybe be out there for hours without gloves. Your hands are going to start to hurt. You're going to feel eventually numbness. But as long as you can come back here within a short period of time, maybe you were only out there for about an hour. You're probably not going to suffer any loss of limbs, but the longer you're out there, the more damage. So we're going to put minutes to hours on threshold. And that's going below 98.6. If you happen to go above, you can get something called a heat stroke or heat exhaustion. For football players and for band camp, for band people that are in band and they're out there in the sun, this is something that they need to be cautious of because as you're out there and your body temperature starts to increase, you need to be able to bring it down. And there's not a whole lot of shade for individuals that are involved in those activities. Or if you're in soccer, for example, maybe your body temperature goes up from running around any outdoor sport, really. And so you need to look out for these symptoms and you need to be able to bring your body back to normal. So you may need to take a break and let your body cool down. You need to drink water. Um, you need to go find some shade and that'll bring you back to normal. If you leave yourself out here and you continue to push your body out of homeostasis, that person can die, right? You can get some very serious reactions here. We have may lose consciousness, for example. You all probably heard of little kids that are left in hot cars. And it happens sometimes where a parent forgets to drop them off at daycare and they leave them in their car seat and then they come out and that child has passed. Because once you're outside of that range for too long, okay, so those little kids' bodies were trying to cool them down. They were sweating. The temperature of the car just kept going up. So they kept going away from this 98.6 higher and higher and higher, and they were never able to go back. The cells start to die because it's too hot. And so the proteins in the cells start to get destroyed, and then the tissue dies, and then the organ dies, and then that's it. At a certain point, you can't reverse that change. So hours, minutes to hours, it depends. And then atmospheric pressure, for this one, I can't really give you a value for this one, but atmospheric pressure, we need a certain amount of atmospheric pressure so that we can breathe in oxygen. And so we can maybe, if we are scuba divers, our atmospheric pressure is going to be affected, right? Because there's more pressure as we dive further into the ocean. And there's something that happens with divers that if they go up too quickly, the gases in their blood, like nitrogen, um, they're affected. And so if they go up too quickly, they get something called the bends, and they can actually die from that. So they need to regulate how they're going up back to the surface because if they do it too quickly, they can actually die from the drastic change in pressure. Or right, if you go up and you're climbing those Himalayan mountains and you go on this trek, the pressure is also going to affect how much oxygen you can breathe in, and so you may need to take an oxygen tank. And some people do pass and perish because of the low oxygen content up there, but also the pressure that there's very little of it up there. Okay, so right now we're going to leave the threshold blank, but you should have put the threshold for these. And so atmospheric pressure, um, the significance is to keep the gases that we need to breathe in at the right concentration. So nutrients, 3 weeks. Oxygen, 5 minutes. Water, 3 days. Temperature, hours, minutes to hours. And atmospheric pressure right now, the threshold we're leaving blank. Okay, so you are writing this in here. So tomorrow, what you all will have are just some scenarios. I'm going to start asking you some questions about levels of organization. You're going to start looking at body systems on your own. So when we come back, we'll be able to start going through some of those body systems, organs, and their function. So if we were to look at this picture, and I'm going to call on Sylvia. You there, Sylvia? Hi,
Yes.
Sylvia. So can you pick two survival needs for this woman that would be in danger, that she would not have enough of, or she would have to be worried about if she's in the desert out there like that?
Water
Perfect. And
and normal body temperature.
excellent. Very good. So just like Sylvia did, you will get an example, you'll get a scenario, and then you'll have to decide which survival needs are the most compromised for that person. All right. So you guys, you completed this one, you completed this one. You should have filled in the Padlet things in here to help you study. And that is what we have for today. So I did record this lesson. I'll put it up there right now. I'll work on making the other unprivate so that you can refer to it. Tomorrow you'll have an asynchronous lesson and it'll be over what we talked about today, levels of organization, and then some things to read up on your own for body systems. You also have the textbook, so you can always reference the textbook as well about what we talked about today. Okay, guys, that's it for today. You can stick around if you have any questions. I'm glad you think it's interesting, Ingrid. I like it too. It's a lot of neat stuff. Okay, so if you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, you can take a bathroom break before third. I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
man.
Bye.
Bye. You're welcome.
Good day.
Bye.
You miss.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See y'all later. Agustin, Fabian, y'all have questions? Just sleeping. Agustin, you there?